From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It's Wednesday, May 27th, 2015. Acclaimed international journalist Terrence Fitzgerald joins us. He's a professor of social work at the University of Southern California, and he's going to join us in studio to discuss his book, Black Males and Racism and White Prescriptions, the Dangerous Social Potential for Ritalin and Other Psychotropic Drugs to Harm Black Males. And Khafre King, a man who lost two siblings to police violence, joins us to talk about police brutality, trauma, and activism. And by the way, it is Thursday, May 28th, and we will now turn to the news. Joining us to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kuymanyika. He is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks for joining us. The national trend to abolish the death penalty continued this week with the state of Nebraska formally ending the practice. State lawmakers voted yesterday to end capital punishment, narrowly overriding Republican Governor Pete Ricketts' veto from the day before. Ricketts responded, saying how, quote, appalled I am that we have lost a critical tool to protect law enforcement and Nebraska families. The law commutes the death sentences of 10 inmates to life in prison. Nebraska is the first state in 2 years to end the death penalty, joining 18 other states. The vote was all the more remarkable because Nebraska is dominated by Republican lawmakers compared to its mostly Democratic-dominated counterparts. A poll conducted in April found that there's still majority support for the death penalty among Americans, but that the level of support has been falling steadily. Republicans are far more likely to back the practice compared to Democrats. The U.S. is joined by a number of totalitarian regimes worldwide in continuing to rely on the death penalty as a form of punishment. Chenjerai, how important is this Nebraska vote?
I think this vote is extremely important because it represents the possibility of conservative states to push beyond their ideological frame. You know, this bill was co-sponsored by Republican Senator Colby Koch, but as Ricketts' response, I mean, this really demonstrates that conservatives and many of the death penalty supporters across the country are still under the deep influence of myths about the death penalty. I mean, in 2010, we had law enforcement officers came together to actually write an op-ed. This included James Abbott, the police chief in West Orange, New Jersey. And he said that, you know, we don't feel the death penalty protects us as police officers. So we have so much information about the death penalty and these myths, and yet they still have purchase. And so in light of that, I think this legislation is really important, and it's a really important victory.
And a section of the USA Patriot Act expires this Sunday. Lawmakers still haven't decided what, if anything, to do about it. Section 215, according to The Hill, has been used by law enforcement almost 200 times per year to collect bank and business records from suspected terrorists and spies, end of quote. But privacy advocates have long denounced the invasive nature of the law into the lives of innocent and ordinary Americans. The USA Freedom Act was intended to address some of the concerns, but activists celebrated when the Senate failed to pass a procedural vote on it recently. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has scheduled a rare Sunday vote on that measure once more, and the House had already passed the bill. The Senate will also consider a bill introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein, who has been a strong proponent of the government's right to spy on Americans. Feinstein's bill criminalizes whistleblowers and is being likened to the Espionage Act. Meanwhile, the Obama administration, panicking at the idea that it might lose some legal justification for mass surveillance, accused lawmakers of playing, quote, national security Russian roulette with the Patriot Act. Chenjerai, if Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act does expire, how serious a victory would that be?
That would be a major victory, and I think it's amazing that in light of what we now know about these surveillance practices, that so many in the Obama administration are still arguing to preserve this oppressive type of surveillance. The Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, commenting on these practices, said they have not identified a single instance involving a threat to the U.S. in which bulk collection under Section 215 made a concrete difference in the outcome of a counterterrorism investigation. So I think what's also important is organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation has laid out a plan. And so they are really stressing that citizens still have the opportunity to connect with their representatives. And I encourage you to go to the Electronic Frontier Foundation's website and just learn more about the issue and to see their plan for how you can connect.
And finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin has stepped into the scandal over yesterday's arrest of a number of FIFA officials in Switzerland. FIFA, the main governing body on the world's most popular sport, is facing charges of corruption and bribery by the U.S. Department of Justice. The arrested officials are expected to be extradited to the U.S. to face charges. Mr. Putin, whose nation was chosen to host the 2018 World Cup, called the arrests, quote, another blatant attempt by the United States to extend its jurisdiction to other states. The hosting decision was investigated last year and cleared, but Russia refused to turn over the computers in question and has subsequently destroyed them. Invoking the U.S.'s persecution of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, Putin made the case that FIFA officials were being similarly unfairly targeted. Here in the U.S., the Clinton Foundation has also come under fire for accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations from FIFA and more from the 2022 World Cup host Qatar. The U.S. lost its bid to host that World Cup. Now, Chenjerai, what do you think the U.S. is going to? Why do you think the U.S. is going after FIFA?
Well, Sonali, sometimes people do the right things for the wrong reasons. In this case, Loretta Lynch aims to start, off strong with her Justice Department on a high-profile issue that FIFA is deeply vulnerable on. And so Putin, it's also clear, would like to avoid any kind of repercussions for the ways that he might have been complicit in that. But at the same time, Putin is, I think, right. The questions he raises about corruption, how we think about corruption, and the U.S.'s hypocrisy on this issue are questions that we can't throw out, although his reasons for doing this may not be the best. So I think it's a complex issue, and I think as the more comes about this, we'll see so many people are involved in this in a lot of different ways.
Chenjerai, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kuymanyika is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. As the Black Lives Matter movement continues to make waves in cities like Baltimore, Ferguson, and New York, many people trot out the now familiar statistics of how African American men are 7 times more likely to be incarcerated than white men, how just over half all African Americans graduate high school compared to more than 3/4 of whites and Asians. Even in grade school, the disparities are stark, with African American boys being 2.5 times more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. To get to the root of these disparities, we turn now to author and academic Dr. Terrence Fitzgerald. He's a clinical assistant professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. His new book is called Black Males and Racism, Improving the Schooling and Life Chances of African Americans. His 2010 book was entitled White Prescriptions, The Dangerous Social Potential for Ritalin and Other Psychotropic Drugs to Harm Black Males. He now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. And let's focus first on your new book. I mean, both these books are very fascinating to me, but the latest book, just out this year, Black Males and Racism, Improving the Schooling and Life Chances of African Americans. In the book, you begin by telling a story quite heartbreaking of how you ran into a boy in Illinois during your work there, or after your work there, whom you had first encountered while you were an intern at an elementary school.
Right.
Can you tell us that story?
Well, it was, I had not too long ago had finished my doctoral dissertation, and I was working as a school social worker within the district and in the district in Champaign, Illinois, and I saw this person at a railroad track, and I looked, and he looked really familiar, and as I looked very closely, I realized it was one of my students who one of the first students I had worked with years before when I was in my undergraduate as a mentor, and then as a social worker with him as well in elementary school and middle school. And I continue to hold or keep track of him but we sort of lost touch about maybe 7th or 8th grade. But as I saw him, we locked eyes, and I just remember this was really, it was like everything had stopped, and I went to wave.
And just before you saw your eyes locked, you had noticed an encounter that he had
With
with
another male, and it was a drug encounter, and I could tell that he was selling. And when he and I locked eyes, he knew. It was like an instant messaging that went across that I knew what he was doing, and I could see a sense of shame as well because I had played such a role in his life at an early age, and it was just everything had flooded back at once between us. And before you knew it, he just began to walk away. And the acknowledgement of each other, it just ended.
And you had thought that he was sort of one of the promising ones,
He
a
was.
lot of intervention.
He was. It was a group of them, but he was such a promising young man. He had, of course, socioeconomic issues, family issues, but so promising, so interested in education, so interested in learning about the world. And as I began to investigate, I began to see how the system itself, his experiences in school, had begun to chip away at the essence of who he wanted to be. And he actually became, as I noted in the book, he fulfilled the perception of the black male, as so many people have, the false perception. And I think that was the shame that was communicated between us.
Now, how does this story illustrate what so many young black men in urban settings go through? You write that you and this boy, quote, shared many of the same societal dilemmas, and yet you've had very different lives.
Right. So it was also the question, one of the reasons of the motivation for both of the books was the question itself of the same experiences, I think, how I related to these black males, these kindred spirits, these brothers I have. We shared a lot of the same experiences in terms of economics, family upbringing, same community, educational experiences, the positive and the negative, more so the negative. And somehow I was able to move beyond, for 2 masters, a bachelor's, and a PhD. And so many of my fellow brothers were left behind.
And how do you explain that?
Well, I look at it it's very...
Because the right will take what you've just said
Right.
and say, you have succeeded through
Right.
pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps, personal responsibility works, and this other
Right.
young man just didn't have what it takes, right? That's
Right.
the narrative.
Well, and I would argue that they had more so. There were so many of my peers who had more of the academic ability, who displayed this willingness more so than I did in education. But I would say that due to their other experiences, we all deal with them differently. And some of us have this fortitude to continue on, and some of us are hindered by the obstacles that are in front of us.
Now, how do you explain the dismal statistics that we see as well? I mean, clearly, when we look at incarceration rates, you can point to racial profiling to explain them, etc. But when we look at educational, so for example, graduation rates, the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, you see these kind of predetermined trajectories for young men being set out so early in life. Some people say there's a preschool to prison pipeline, even showing preschool age children being disciplined at an early age more so than their white peers for the same things. Is that one very important, crucial thing we need to look at?
It really is. The disciplinary procedures, also the some people have coined it this cultural mismatch. If you look at who is in our schools, who are the majority of teachers within our schools, and we look at also their training to dealing with these particular populations, we know that they're ill-equipped to dealing with the transition of a large majority of students of color, males of color. They're ill-equipped, and we look at our from there, we can even look at the university settings, the schools themselves, and the programs. A lot of the programs don't even focus on the issues of race. They don't make it mandatory. So these teachers walk in ill-equipped, or some of them already have preconceived biases that are played out within the classroom.
And yet, of course, again, to take the the standard right-wing narrative, it's the problem is absentee fathers.
Right.
Welfare, is a big part of the problem. The cutting of welfare benefits, the increasing of requirements, to even receive the paltry benefits. That's never seen as the real issue, but it's again, the sort of Bill Cosby approach to why young people are in the position they're in.
And it's something we've done historically toward people of color. It's always a manner of blaming the victim. Yeah. And we've done it not only with people of color, we've done it with women as well. And it's just a continued narrative. It's easy to say it's this, as opposed to it's a combination of things. So for my take and my research, it is a combination. There is something to be said about the absence of fatherhood, the absence of different programs. But then you also have to take the other side, the programs that have been cut. Where I'm from, Head Start, in Illinois, the state of Illinois, the budget toward Head Start being cut, the lack of training for teachers.
We had covered on our program recently about how the issue of child support has impoverished poor fathers and actually imprisoned them and made it even less likely they could earn more child support.
Right, and we can even look at the 60s and 70s when social workers were going out to homes to make sure if a mother was receiving welfare that the man could not be in the home. So in order to continue to receive these services. So if that's the case, we have to say as well, what were the contributions that the federal government and state governments had in breaking up the family as well. So the responsibility doesn't end with the father and the parent in the home. We also have to look at the policies that were put in place that deter these relationships from coming together.
One of the things that you point out in both your books in trying to understand systems of racial oppression and how they manifest within educational and other systems is what you call the white racial frame. What is that, and how does that play out particularly in schools?
Well, a mentor of mine and an esteemed colleague in the field of sociology, Professor Joe Fagan at Texas A&M, he devised this term, the white racial frame. And unlike any theory that I'd ever looked at, it didn't just look at racism from a historical perspective only or from a legal perspective. He looked at the rationale. What caused the rationale for slavery? You needed a rationale for enslaving and the physical and emotional mistreatment of people. This rationale helped to support the activities that went afterward. But not only that, it also influenced our perceptions. So these false perceptions were needed, how blacks were on the lower tier of the hierarchy, biological. We've looked at science, how science has tried to prove that blacks are inferior. We even have 2007 Nobel Peace Prize winner Dr. James Watson, who had the controversial statement that blacks were still seen as inferior. 2007. So this manifestation is these perceptions have driven. So the white
it's a dehumanization.
It is, and the white racial frame basically says that we walk around with four generations of these stereotypes, these misperceptions of people of color. And when we encounter them, they come flooding out, and they are translated in the way we treat each other, the way we create policies and programs that help or hamper these people, or it may come out in physical terrorism, the KKK, the rise of these white supremacies, race supremacist groups since President Obama was elected. All of these are part of the white racial frame.
And also in the encounters between police and young black men.
Right. So
where there's a huge potential for violence because one party is almost always armed.
Right. And you think about it today, and conservatives will say, well, these images aren't as they were in the 50s or 60s. But they are. We see it in our media. We see it in the way we depict. If we look at the victims of the previous shootings, we look at how the narrative was created, how they described the black males, not even as victims, as you have to mention their crime, their previous crimes, inability to pay their child support.
Right, they have to be perfect, innocent saints in order to be sympathized.
Right, and we see that not only with crime, we've seen it with sports. We've seen it with the villainization of black males. the good Negro versus the bad Negro. Jordan, the good Negro, bad Mike Tyson. The good Negro, we can look at basketball, Duke truly included. We look at, let's say we're looking at education, institution of education. They were never truly meant to include people of color. They were for white males to continue on with the dogma of the republic, to continue on what what democracy was, the white Protestant ethics, you know. So blacks were never considered in that. If we look at all institutions, major institutions, it's the same way. We were never truly included. So we see as blacks begin to receive more rights, we still see these barriers within education popping up, saying no. We can look at from slaves weren't allowed to read. And the laws that were instituted around it,
and of course, huge fights to integrate schools,
right.
etc.
And so then we moved to we look at Plessy versus Ferguson, to Brown versus Board of Education, to even today we look at the rising number of private schools that are started
and charter schools.
Schools, and there are schools. There's a great example in Louisiana where a school district which is split predominantly a mix between white and black, but very rich and very poor. The school the white community has decided to leave the school district to create their own because they didn't want their funding to go to educate poor blacks. So we see these examples around the country continuing on.
Yeah. I want to turn to your 2010 book, which I also find extremely fascinating. The title is White Prescriptions, the Dangerous Social Potential for Ritalin and Other Psychotropic Drugs to Harm Black Males. Now, how commonly are black youngsters, particularly boys, prescribed psychotropic drugs, and in what context? Are we talking about in the home as a result of what school is recommending? What about within prisons where a lot of people are medicated, juveniles who are in detention centers?
So for my study, I began to look at what was occurring within the public education itself, within the confines of Illinois where I was working at the time. So I really wanted to understand why we began to see more and more males. Research has talked about that over and over again. Males outnumber females in terms of those who are being prescribed medications as Adderall, Ritalin, and so on. But no one really talked about racial makeup. So as I began to look, I began to see that, yes, it's true that males were outnumbered females. That's easy. But white males and black males, the reasoning for medication were different. White males predominantly were for academic reasons. So within the school setting themselves, teachers would describe, fidgetiness, hyperactivity, not being able to focus in terms of academics. So therefore, they were prescribed or sent for an evaluation in terms of that. Black males, on the other hand, were all for behavioral reasons. So it wasn't just the academic, it was about controlling these particular males. Any sort of behavior that was actually emulated by the white population, which wasn't seen as a reason for medication for the whites, but for blacks, the same behavior that was displayed with whites was the linchpin in terms of saying that we need to sort of do a follow-up, a medical follow-up, and begin to see social workers within the schools going, you know what we'll do? I'll take your child to a doctor we know if you don't have access to. Parents trust the schools.
And it also almost sounds like they're doing them a favor.
They're doing you a favor. So I began to see that a number of the social workers were going to the same doctor who was known within the community to overprescribe medication. They would go in for 15, 20-minute observations and walk out with prescriptions that were in the same class as drugs such as cocaine. But then the problem began as this. We began to see these males, the medication, it isn't a fixed sort of recipe. You have to play with things. Increasing dosage, no, that increase did something to their appetite. So now we have to prescribe this. Well, now they're not sleeping. Well, now we have to prescribe this. So you begin to see not only from behavioral, we begin to see now medications with sleeping and eating.
And that sounds heartbreaking. I mean, just to think about this being done, particularly to children.
I knew a 5-year-old who was prescribed lithium.
Oh my God.
And basically, if you looked at, from my observation of evaluating the family, it was really a school family misconnect.
Wow.
But the mother felt so, she hadn't didn't feel empowered,
Yeah.
and no one was advocating for her. So you have these entities sitting around a large table: school social workers, psychologists, administrator, maybe another administrator, and teachers, describing your child using the textbook terms that you would see on these commercials. Is your child doing this? Are you doing this? Next thing you know, they're saying, we see this, we think this should occur. The parents who said no, you begin to see more calls from the school to the home. You need to come get your child. We're
Right.
having these issues. It was
Right.
like, now then I begin to see parents go, I throw my hands up, I'll do it. And they do it, then you see the decreasing of calls and the decrease of
So
attention.
they literally harass parents and
They have harassed.
medicating their
Yes.
children.
Yes.
I mean, these are relatively subjective diagnoses.
Very subjective.
ADD and ADHD, the kinds of attention deficit disorders for which Ritalin and other types of drugs are prescribed,
Very subjective.
first of all, require many, many hours of evaluation. And even then, there's no sort of, this is based on it can depend on the setting in which an observation occurs. It can depend on the, whether the child has eaten or slept enough that night, and of course on the doctor themselves. And what has the impact been of overprescription of drugs like Ritalin on young black boys?
Well, and that's where the research is very raw. Very few people have dug
followed
into
it
it
up, yeah.
and followed up. The assumption is that we're beginning to see that males in particular it's an entryway or a gateway into other drugs. So we've seen that how some kids began to move on to other drugs, especially in my experience in the high school level, when the child is now a teen, has been taking a prescription maybe since 4th or 5th grade, now feels that they don't need this. But now they have quit cold turkey. Now they're having withdrawal issues. And then they're thinking, well, maybe if I use this or that, marijuana or some other drug, it'll help mellow me out. So I knew kids, teenage boys, males, who were also self-medicating themselves because they had not been able to get off of the medication in a proper manner. So it has a lot of long-term effects. We've seen issues around males who've had psychological issues in terms of having delusions.
Hallucinations?
Yeah, hallucinations, actual delusions, and also fits of violence. So the medication plays out differently due to one's biology.
Well, I want to ask you what you make of President Obama's response to some of the crises that we see in young black men today. He's trotted out his program for boys of color, My Brother's Keeper, several times. He's brought this up in response to the crisis. What do you make of this kind of approach?
I think, a part of me feels that it's needed. It is at least something, especially with the topics that we're seeing today in the news. The violence that's occurring, Chicago, for example, the multiple males who are dying in the streets, Detroit. So we do need an approach. We do need a focus. Do I think it is all-inclusive? No. But I do think it is a start.
Better than nothing?
It's better than nothing, but then at the same time, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket and say this is the route we should go. We need to truly, if we're truly going to make if we're truly going to make differences, we have to look at all facets of the lives of black males. Education I think is the most important, because if you think about it, education, I said in my books, education is a microcosm of society. We really underestimate what happens within those four walls. There is where children learn who they are and also how the world sees them. We really underestimate that, and we also give too much credit to teachers. I think I've met some amazing teachers who've broken their backs to help children, but we underestimate their training. We underestimate who gets into the profession. We underestimate the policies that also hold teachers from really doing good work. So it has to be a multifaceted approach.
Holistic approach.
It has to be.
Finally, in the last last minute of our conversation, Dr. Terrence Fitzgerald, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a personal background on yourself. We started out this conversation talking about your own background compared to this one boy you had mentored and encountered. This must be a personal issue for you.
It is. It's a very personal issue, specifically because I was one who was teetering. I teetered. I came from, at first, after my father divorced my mother, and then my mother remarried, poor working class family, in an institution, a school system that really was at the point of, it was much segregated. And also I can't think of but maybe one positive experience that I had throughout, and the fact that the way that teachers in the system tried to determine who I was and what my value was.
Write your whole future for
Right,
you.
right. I even tell in my book of how a teacher, or my guidance counselor, said it was the Marine Corps, not college.
Wow. Well, I'm certainly glad to see you in this setting and doing this very important academic work. Thank you so much, and best of luck to you. Terrence Fitzgerald is a professor of social work at the University of Southern California, and we'd just been discussing his books, Black Males and Racism and White Prescriptions, the Dangerous Social Potential for Ritalin and Other Psychotropic Drugs to Harm Black Males. This is Uprising. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. The U.S. Department of Justice has just come to a major settlement with Cleveland Police Department in Ohio. A 110-page report that the DOJ laid out what Time magazine called, quote, one of the most extensive sets of restrictions ever placed upon a law enforcement agency. The news outlet explained that, quote, the agreement requires Cleveland's police to adopt hundreds of new policies and procedures to fix what the federal government has called a pattern of systemic abuses and unconstitutional practices. It includes mandates to adopt community policing strategies, prohibitions on use of force for people who are handcuffed or restrained, and restrictions on firing from and at moving vehicles, as well as extensive mandates on logging use of force incidents, including each time officers unholster their weapons. Cleveland now joins cities like New Orleans, Ferguson, Missouri, Newark, New Jersey, and Albuquerque, New Mexico in facing some federal restrictions. The tragic case of the fatal police shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice was among the triggers for Cleveland's DOJ agreement. But police brutality is not the result of a few bad apples. The documentation of police abuse, along with public outrage over the past year, has revealed a widespread national scourge. And today, we'll examine how police abuse has impacted one family. My guest is Khafre King. He is a Los Angeles-based actor and singer whose brother, Jason, and sister, Aja, were both killed under suspicious circumstances in relation to the police. Welcome to Uprising, Khafre.
Hi, how's it going?
Doing very well. Thanks so much for joining us. So you lost a brother and a sister.
Yes.
That's, it's hard to imagine what a family goes through with that level of loss. You lost both of them within a year, both in circumstances related to the police,
Yes.
which is, I think, just a horrific microcosm of what so many families, particularly black families, face around the U.S. So let's start with your brother, Jason, who was killed in 2009 in New York. Tell us a little bit about what happened to him.
Well, my brother had a run-in with the police, and basically what happened was, we don't know. We weren't there for the actual run-in, but we do know that he had run-ins with the police quite often. Just being a black male within New York, there's a lot of racial profiling that goes on. And in this particular incident, he wound up losing his life. And we know that there was we equate a suspicion around because of the fact that they gave us a false autopsy. And that's the main key point that really just triggered what really happened.
So specifically, he was, what happened in the encounter? He was being arrested for something?
He was being arrested for something. And they claimed that maybe it was like a misdemeanor stealing of something, or like, I don't know, it could have been anywhere to like a bottle of juice or something like that, or anything, but it was very misdemeanor, and it was something that wound up ending his life. And that's the...
Was he shot? Was he beaten?
He was beaten, and there were bruises on his body. There were like actual bruises all over his corpse. And they initially said, and it was crazy, they came up with this horrendous story that he committed suicide and he just jumped from like some type of roof or something like that. And it was somebody else's autopsy, like an actual other name on it. And my mother said that does not sound like my son. It just doesn't sound like my son. So we investigated further, and we found out that that was not the right autopsy. It was someone else's name on it. Then they finally gave us the correct autopsy. She went and she did the whole process, and she just relayed all this information to me. I wasn't there for this process. I was in school, and I didn't even know anything happened until later. And
so your brother died of literally being beaten. I mean, it sounds like on the surface that he was beaten to death.
yes.
That's a lot of violence.
Yes, it is.
Physical violence, which, of course, these days doesn't surprise anybody, including people who are not always in the demographic that's being targeted, because we've seen the videos of what happened to Eric Garner.
Yes.
We know some of what happened to Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And so was there ever any accountability? Did the police ever, once you saw the real autopsy, was there ever any justice for what happened to your brother?
There was no justice because we're dealing with social economic means and just a lack of being able to get a great, powerful lawyer at the time to really fight this.
Right. So you couldn't, and the police rely on that.
Yeah, there was no way. Yeah, they rely on that. I can name several cases where he actually had to, he had run-ins with the police, and he had to cop a plea to other things because he didn't have the money to have a good attorney. Like he had a drug charge that was against him, and he was not a drug dealer, but he was just hanging out with the wrong people, and he went down for it, So it's like things like that often happen just to African American males that are hanging out with the wrong people, or they're walking around New York, or they're getting profiled because of what they have on. It just happens on like not even a rare, but just like a day-to-day basis.
And it also happens to African American women like your sister. So within a year of your brother's death in New York, your sister died in police custody in Texas, on the other side of the country. Can you tell us what happened to her?
What happened to her was, it was one of the biggest tragedies that, I've ever faced. I don't want anybody else to ever face this. What happened to her was she was. It's really even like hard to like really talk about, but she was going to school at
Corsicana, Texas.
Yeah, Corsicana, Texas, and she was there basically by herself. My mom was flying back and forth between New York and Texas, fighting my brother's case, trying to get a lawyer. And we get a call one day when I came to visit Texas, and we found out that she was in the hospital. That's the first thing that they told us. She was in the hospital for depression. The next thing you know, they called us back within 30 minutes and said that she was dead. She had been arrested. And that's basically the call that we got. But they also told us, well, not they told us, the officer was actually chuckling while he told us this. Like he was chuckling to my mother. And she just lost it. Like she couldn't even like really comprehend what this person was telling her.
Do you know what exactly, or even a sense of what happened? You were told by the police that her death was drug-related?
Yes, they claimed that it was drug-related. They claimed that she just committed suicide with drugs, basically.
Had she had issues with drugs?
Not at all.
Huh.
She was an avid chess player. She went to the School for Performing Arts in Baltimore, Duke Ellington. She was basically She was basically someone that just focused on her goals in life. You know, we often called her a prodigy because she was just, you know, she would go to the chess forum during the weekend. She would just play all day and night, and she would beat people that were like beyond her years in chess. And she was just like a young prodigy. She wasn't a person that did drugs. She didn't really hang out ever. That's pretty much her attitude, you know. She was someone that loved animals. She was just a really nice young girl that was just focused.
And you've never been able to find out what happened to her?
No, because they have so many immunity laws that you just can't even scathe through them to get the proper information that will make any family feel comfortable and have peace and resolution result just surrounding the loss of an individual that they're close to. We just didn't have anything of that nature. Well, they didn't dispense to us anything of that nature.
And you're just supposed to accept this?
Yes.
Your family is supposed to accept that you lost 2 members of your family?
2 siblings. And it's just supposed to be like, this is the social norm. Like, this is just what happens to African Americans or Latino Americans or anyone that, you know, falls into the bottom of this caste system that we're, you know, constantly facing or seeing uprise and rehash through different so-called norms is what it seems to be becoming. It's becoming a social norm. It's becoming like, you know, it's okay if we eradicate you. It's okay if you just disappear. It's okay if your life doesn't matter because that's what you're just supposed to accept. And that's how, you know, that's how it made me feel. It made me feel like it just doesn't matter. Like, if you die, no matter what you're trying to achieve, your life can just be smudged out and erased, and no one even cares. You know, you're just supposed to go on.
So, looking back, because this happened a few years ago, do you hold the police directly responsible for the deaths of your brother and sister? Even if you can't necessarily legally prove it?
I hold them directly responsible. I hold them responsible because their last breaths in their life was in their hands. Like, they were within the vicinity. They physiologically had the means to do whatever they could as someone that's supposed to protect and serve you to save them. So I definitely hold them responsible just as fellow human beings that are being paid to preserve life, all life, especially within, you know, just the context of this country, and just period. That's their job. Their job is to protect and serve, irregardless of your race, you know, your color, your sex, or anything like that. And even if they were criminally being charged with something, they weren't convicted. So the fact that it's like, okay, well, you're on the opposite end of being charged with something, but now your life doesn't matter. Your rights aren't taken away. You still have inalienable rights to, you know, the right to live and pursue happiness. These are certain things that you can't just, you know, just disregard, you know.
So in the past year, the issue of police brutality, particularly against African Americans, has been elevated to a national story, even though, as the case of your brother and sister illustrate, this has been an ongoing problem for many, many years.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how much more empowered people are in the Black community right now to digitally document and communicate and organize in a way that maybe we didn't have it before.
Well, there are definitely technological advances that enable you to record what's happening, to communicate with others what's happening. And I guess it really comes down to that. It's communication and documentation and recording, and that's pretty much what, you know, the technological advances have given us. But at the same time, I think it's bigger than that. I think that we need to communicate amongst each other, your family members before they go out, and this is for everyone, and everyone that falls into this category. You need to communicate with your family members that this can happen. You need to be on guard. And it doesn't matter what your social status is. It doesn't matter, you know, what level of society you may think you're on. When you go out that door, you can be a target, you know, if you're in the wrong place.
Well, what does it mean about our society when that is a conversation that you need to have if you are a particular or in a particular racial group? Because, you know, white families rarely, if ever, feel the need to talk to each other about such things. That I might not see you when you come, you know, after you leave that door today, and be careful. And
what it says about society is we're not living up to our true powers as human beings and our true responsibility as human beings. That's what it really says. I think that in this day and age, it's kind of like just it just diminishes our quality and our what we stand for. It's like we claim to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I'm not disputing that, but we have to really hold ourselves accountable to that if we're going to claim that. If that's going to be our title, that's going to be our, that's what going to be our motto. That's what we promote to other countries when they want to come here and visit. We need to make sure that that's true to the best of our abilities, and I hope that we can.
Now, on this issue of documentation, I mean, I'm wondering what sort of a difference could it have made to bring, for example, at least your brother's case to justice, had there been a passerby with a video camera, with a smartphone in 2009, who might have been able to capture what happened to him, not just in terms of being able to hold police even slightly accountable, because we're still waiting for some serious convictions, you know, but at least so you would have known what happened to him. Right?
That would be so amazing because, one, it could have preserved his life. And that's the main thing. That's the beauty of technology when it's used in the right way. You can
even
save lives, even as a preventative, factor. It definitely could have preserved his life. Someone, just knowing that someone's watching you, changes behavior. Like, even if, a child is doing something bad and you say, hey, I see you, they might stop what they're doing. So if a police is trying to harass somebody or beat somebody, and there's, not just other African Americans watching them, but all types of people, some white people, Hispanic people, Hispanic people, whatever, just anybody that cares about human life in general, watching, and it's like, I see what you're doing, that can definitely make somebody say, okay, I need to be precautious because this could come up in court, and this could, ruin my family's life and, the way that I, feed my family and things like that nature.
So I want to talk a little bit about your mother, Ishtaim, who has been obviously impacted in a way that nobody else could imagine except someone who's lost not one but two children. There was a video of your mother visiting your brother Jassan's grave several years after his death. I believe this particular instance was the second time she had visited, the first time only being a week before, and it had just taken her so long to just even confront the fact that she had lost her son. And I want to play that video for our audience.
I was so traumatized and devastated at Jassan's loss, I haven't been able to come here for 5 years. This is actually my only visit, my second visit, which was just a week ago, the first visit. So I was numb to the fact and haven't been able to face the fact that he's actually gone. Did not want to come to the cemetery and did not want to face any of this. And now I have the strength to face it finally, and wasn't even looking for anything attached to a cemetery, a marker or anything else, because in my mind, in my subconscious, he was still here.
And that is my guest, Khafre King's mother, and she was visiting her son Jassan's grave. What has the loss of her children done to her, and how has she even coped with it?
Well, first of all, my mother is an ordained minister. She has a doctorate in theology. She studied at Boston University. She also went to Harvard. She's had several churches, along with my father, in the AME Church and the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church. So this definitely is something that has sidetracked that. This is something that has deferred from her being able to pursue her original passion, and she had to take on a different passion. And just from being a mother, I felt like it shattered her world to lose her only daughter, not just her firstborn son, but her only daughter. And I think this is something that has definitely changed the course of her life. It's like if you could go back and just see what events change people's lives totally, this will be two events that definitely, just cataclysmically just changed the whole course of her life.
And does she speak out about issues around police brutality, link up with the broader sort of movement around it?
She definitely speaks from a place of passion and a place of pain and a place of, just being void of those human beings that she'll never physically see again. And it's become her life. It's like taking over her whole, every single waking moment is dedicated to the cause. And it's really just not even, I think that it's often promoted And I think that people try to capitalize off of what's going on, like the cause, the Black Lives Matter. But for her, it's not even a cause. This is just preventing this from happening to other mothers because she knows the depth of that pain. That's really what it is. She just doesn't want to see this happen to any more children again, to any more people again, if she can help it, because that she feels like she owes them. It's like it's really that much of a connection. She feels like she's just rendering something to them by going out there and speaking out.
How have the deaths of your siblings impacted you? I mean, I don't mean for that question to sound trite because it's just such a huge question.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we need to talk about these things.
It is a huge question. Well, when you're pursuing your own dreams, and you're in college, and you have this map and this plan for your life. And just even me being here today, like I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. So it definitely changes the course of what you're doing while you're pursuing your life's passion. You have like a new sort of, it's not even so much as like you have a new passion, like now you want to be an activist. No, this is just a part of your life that you can't deny. And it impacts you because on a personal level, I never get to see my brother and sister again. Like, no matter how much noise any of what's going on makes, how much ripple it makes in the world, I don't get to see them. And that's really the biggest impact, other than anything else. And other than that, it's just picking up the pieces from that mourning and that grief, and just piecing your life back together and just pursuing what you were already on course to pursue. So it's just getting back on course and just allowing yourself the time to do that, but also knowing that the world doesn't slow down while you're doing that. And that's the main thing, because this is like a rat race, just like, people get up every day and they pursue and they're competing with you, and they compete with you no matter what you've been through,
Right.
So.
And you are in a competitive field.
Definitely.
You're an actor and you're a musician.
Definitely.
And your own passion is something that you're obviously trying to pursue while dealing not just with the deaths of your brother and sister, but also with the fact that, you're doing a radio interview. You want to speak out about this issue, but in the meantime, you have a career to pursue. Tell our audience a little bit about what work you do as you try to live your life,
As I try to live my life, well, I've been pursuing acting. I studied theater. I basically, well, my most recent play was Shakespeare's Mark Antony and Cleopatra. I played Euphronius. Before that, I was in Man on a Ledge. I was in American Gangster. I've been in several different plays throughout college, Shakespearean plays. And this is something I've been pursuing passionately. I've also been pursuing my music career passionately, just making as creative songs as I possibly can. But when things like this happen to a person, it totally sidetracks you, it totally just takes you off of your normal equilibrium, your normal access of what makes your world spin. And it just like psychologically derails you, really. But for me, I've tried to use it as fuel and as motivation to pursue my passion even more, because that's what they would want me to do. But there's always that notion of they're not here, and I wish that they could listen to this. I wish that they could come to my play. And it's like there's a hole in your heart. You're just missing those wonderful people that you've grown up with.
And I think we don't stop to think often enough how police violence and police targeting, not just the fatal killings, but even microaggressions, even the getting snared in the dragnet of police surveillance and essentially criminalization, prevents people from just living their lives to their full potential.
Exactly. Reaching your zenith, just reaching for the stars and living your life to your full potential. It's like you want to reach for the stars, but at the same time, you have people that are, demonizing and dehumanizing and criminalizing you through a certain context and a certain lens. So it's like, it's like the society that you're trying to help and impact and relinquish your gifts to also sees you as a problem. And that's where the problem comes in, That's where like the most difficulty comes in. So it's like God has given you all these gifts, and you just want to just be better, and you just want to just uplift people in the world. But at the same time, you see, when you go out to the world, they're, instead of protecting and serving you, the people are looking at you like a criminal, you know.
Are you heartened by this past year of attention to this issue, activism in the streets, that there might be a sea change, at least culturally, if not legally, and in some cases legally, at least with the charges on the Baltimore police officers and the indictments being a big and fairly unprecedented step, and minor as it is, it's better than nothing?
It's better than nothing is, I think it's overrated.
Yeah.
I think it's bigger than just the police. Like, I think that's a minute level. I think that's kind of like pawns to a bigger game, and I think that it's a corporation that profits off of this whole systemic process of people being harassed by the police and being sent to jail and being turned into free labor. But I also think that before
You're
it gets to that...
You're referring to, for example, prison labor and money that's made off of inmates?
Definitely. But
new slavery, a lot of people have called it. Yeah.
Before it gets to that, I think it's just a human problem. And I think it can't happen if we all look at each other as equals and we all love each other. And I think that when everyone just decides that this is not the way our society is going to be run as a people and just as fellow citizens of this country and of the world, then I think that the problem will stop. I don't think it's going to stop until then, because you can arrest this cop and that cop, and then you have to go through another process of it happening again. But if the people don't like it and everyone is like, that's just not what we want, then it's not going to happen, because you have to vote for it to happen. You have to allow it to happen with your voting with your dollars and voting with just your actions, and just physically going down there and electing this guy that thinks that it's okay.
Well, Khafre, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck with your career. Best of luck with the rest of your life, and I know that your family will never recover from the loss of your two siblings.
Yes, definitely.
But I want to thank you for sharing their stories with us.
Thank you for having me. My
guest, Khafre King, is a Los Angeles-based actor and musician. You can find his work at soundcloud.com/Khafre King. That's spelled Khafre King. And we'll also post other links to our website, Uprising with Sonali, later today. Khafre's brother Jason and sister Aja were both killed under suspicious circumstances in relation to the police. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. And Alexander Hobbs is our technical director. Kiana Turner is our audio engineer. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Uprising with Sonali. Your subscription sustains the TV production of Uprising. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kohatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.